The New Hampshire primaries happened this week, which many will tell you is the first in the nation primary. Contrary to popular belief, Iowa is not the first in the nation primary because it's a caucus.
It's not a primary.
The results for the New Hampshire primary were predicted. Like the second polls closed, like all the news stations just got up and they say, we are now predicting the winners for the New Hampshire primary.
Within 20 minutes of the polls closing, they were already calling.
So it was like 5 o'clock Pacific when the polls closed. And just 20 minutes before that, I was watching some of the news broadcasts. They had dozens and dozens of cars lined up just to get into the parking lot. And they had lines out the doors. And they were saying in a lot of precincts, they were going to leave the polls open until everybody that was waiting in line got to vote. And so if you're predicting the winners of the primary, the second all the precincts are supposed to close, but there's many that still aren't finished yet, that's kind of putting some of the candidates at a disadvantage, I feel like.
Well,
why would you go in and vote for the underdog anymore if you feel like
right, but
he's
But do you really think that people sitting in their car waiting to get in are listening to results on the radio?
I think so. If you're the kind of person who cares enough to actually go out to these things and vote, then yeah, you probably are invested in it enough to listen.
But I think at that point, if you're already in line, what are you going to flip a U-turn and go home? No, like you're going to go do it. But the other thing I would say to that, I agree that I think it was silly how early they called it, but given the results,
their predictions were accurate. I do have to say that.
I mean, there was just no way at that point that.
So let's talk about the results. On the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders won, and he won by like 20 points. Like he completely blew out Hillary.
Yep.
Bernie Sanders got a huge bump coming out of New Hampshire after he won. His campaign reported that within 24 hours of the primary, he's raised over $6.2 million. And I saw some figures as high as $7 million.
Wow.
Which is huge. And if you listen to him talk about it, the main driving point is that it doesn't come from any big super PAC or any big organization. It's all individual people. Their average donation amount is $34.
27.
I think 34 is the latest one. Oh. I think 34 is the latest one after the 7 million that was raised.
Do we know what Hillary Clinton's average donation is? I would imagine it's much higher.
Over $100. I heard her mention it the other day. I think it's like 127 or something like that. Bernie Sanders also won in every income bracket other than those making over $200,000 a year, which you're not surprised they lost that. I'm surprised they won everything else below it.
No, I'm not surprised that he won every income bracket. Well, I mean, what would be the next highest after, or what would be the one below 200,000? Do you know?
Probably 100,000 or 150.
So, I mean, that maybe surprises me a little bit, but that's only because that's still, a pretty decent amount of money.
I mean, to me, what stands out from the Democratic primary in New Hampshire is that Bernie won by as much as he did. I mean, he took a lot of undecided voters. He took, every income level below 200,000. When they broke it down by demographics, he won most, if not all, of the demographic breakdowns. I mean, he won across the board.
So it does look like Bernie won, but there was a lot of confusion going on as far as superdelegates actually being awarded to Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. Do you kind of want to explain that a little
yeah, because
further?
if you look online right now, it'll say that Hillary Clinton has like 300 something delegates attributed to her, and Bernie Sanders only has 20 or 30 that he's won from the caucus and the primary. And so a lot of people looked at that and freaked out and thought that Hillary Clinton was basically going to run away with the election without anyone who voted for Bernie Sanders having their voices heard. But as it was pointed out by Vox, and we'll include the article in the show notes, of course, the Democrats have over 4,700 delegates that are available to win during primary season, and only about 700 of them are superdelegates. And the only thing that makes superdelegates different than regular delegates is they're not bound by the votes of their state. They can pledge their allegiance to whoever. So hypothetically, Hillary Clinton could have lost every election in the primary season and still gotten 700 something delegates because of the superdelegates. But when it comes down to it, it's like 6% of the total delegate breakdown. So this isn't something where Hillary Clinton's going to pick up all these superdelegates and run away with the election when Bernie Sanders technically won more of the vote.
Well, I think it's important to note that people that are looking that up now, this is not something that just developed after New Hampshire. Because I've been using these stats in the class for a few weeks now, and that number has been there for a long, long time. So I'm not really sure what caused people to kind of freak out about it now because it's been there already. But I think it's important for people to understand how that works, because when you do, I mean, my students had the same reaction when I pulled it up. They were just like, how could she already have this many? And they just, it just became this whole like, what's going on? All these kids were all freaked out about, how many she had over him. But I mean, this has been like this for a while now.
Yeah, I think I saw in the article it's been this way since like the 1980s.
Well, I just meant like those numbers.
Oh, those delegates have been...
yes, her having the 300 and, those have been there for weeks now.
Yeah, and they, like I said before, they're pledged delegates. Those delegates don't have to vote for Hillary when the nomination
that's just
comes.
Who they're pledging to right
so
now.
The moral of the superdelegate conversation is that it doesn't matter yet, and nobody should be looking at those numbers and freaking out thinking there's some conspiracy or
because
something.
When you look at the delegates from New Hampshire, I mean, he won 15 and she only won 9, so that's more in line with with the results. And so I think as long as people know that he won in New Hampshire and he did get more delegates than she did from that, primary, that's, keeping people on track and not having people freak out for no reason.
And on the Republican side, to my dismay, Donald Trump won, and Kasich, of all people, came in second.
Yeah, that happened, and I kind of did a double take. I was like, wait a minute. He was one of them.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, because he hasn't registered on any national polls above 5%, John Kasich is the current governor of Ohio. And he basically, his strategy for the nomination was he invested all of his money in New Hampshire, and he just wanted to pull strong enough to be recognized in New Hampshire, which he totally did.
Actually, that was a pretty good strategy, because for people who weren't paying any attention to the last, 4 or 5 candidates, polling at the bottom of the GOP, he's suddenly somebody that everybody acknowledged.
And Christie tried to do the same thing, and it didn't work for him. He only got 9% of the vote, and he's now dropped out since the results. So John Kasich came in second, and then third, fourth, and fifth place. Cruz for third, Jeb Bush got fourth place, and Marco Rubio got fifth place, but it was split by like a percentage point and a half. Like, it was super close.
Yeah.
Now, Marco Rubio had some issues.
He had a bad debate performance, and it's funny because I was listening to the podcast, last week's podcast today, and I was like, man, I made all these, not predictions. I gave all these opinions of what was going to happen in New Hampshire, and in a lot of ways, when it came to Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, I was completely wrong. But Marco Rubio stumbled during the debate and repeated himself a bunch of times, and he got called by Chris Christie. He got called out by Chris Christie for being a robot.
Having a prepared speech. Right. And then he responded by once again stumbling into his prepared speech, which if you watch the mashup where it just goes from 1 to the second to the third to the fourth, it's bad. It's hard to watch.
It's terrible.
Granted, I don't know how any of these people do it, because I could never sit up on a stage and take 5 or 6 different people firing all these different facts and opinions straight at me while trying to get my message across. I don't know how any of the candidates on the right or the left do it, so I do have respect for that. But it was still kind of hard to watch Rubio implode.
Yeah, I don't think this is as big of a deal as it's been made out to be. I think it definitely impacted him in New Hampshire, because a lot of people who vote in New Hampshire don't decide until they're literally standing at the poll booth. So that probably impacted him there. But when you look at the fact that Marco Rubio essentially tied for third place to Jeb Bush, who spent the Jeb Bush campaign spent like $100 million in New Hampshire to get tied for third. I mean, Jeb Bush there is a much worse outcome than Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is still basically the third candidate behind Cruz and Trump. This hasn't changed. The only thing that changed is he didn't, sweep away New Hampshire like everybody started saying he was going to after Iowa, which was also a completely unrealistic prediction. So Chris Christie and Carly Fiorina have dropped out since then. In New Hampshire, Chris Christie had about 7% of the vote, and I think Carly Fiorina had like 2 or 3%. So as a whole, there's maybe 10% of the GOP vote that needs to be redistributed now. And I just don't know where that's going to fall. I don't know who's going to get a bump from that.
So how many GOP candidates are left? Because we started with, was it 14 or 16?
I think we started with 14.
And we're
There are
down
6
to
left.
6.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you, New Hampshire, for winnowing the field.
I feel like it's a reality show, and we're just kind of like starting to pick down to the final four or whatever the important number always is.
Yeah, there's a good chance that after South Carolina, which is the next primary for Republicans, there's a really good chance that you get another dropout, probably Carson.
Carson.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
and then by the time we get to Super Tuesday in March, you'll be down to 3 or 4 candidates on the Republican side. It'll be like you never had 14 of them.
I think that'll draw out one last one, and then I think the 4 will just kind of fight it out till the end, or till we get a lot closer to the end.